Hello and welcome to part 2 of the 50 greatest films ever, according to me, right now at this point in time. Let's get right back into it. At number 11, again moving chronologically, we have from 1946, Frank Capra's It's a Wonderful Life. I love this film. It's one of my favorite films, but I also think obviously it's one of the best films I've ever seen. And I think that if I was to do, say, a top 10 greatest films, if I was to rank all of these 50 movies, this would probably make the top 10. I think this is one of the great pieces of cinema that has ever been created, because I think it's so universal. I think it's a film that everyone can really get something out of. I think it has such a strong message and such an emotional core to it, and something that surely connects with almost everyone. I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone who doesn't at least really like this film. Of course, you know, if they've seen it. And if you don't kind of get choked up by the ending of this film, then I just think you probably don't have any emotions whatsoever. You're either a sociopath, a psychopath, or both. This film is great. It just really is, and I haven't really said anything about it. But obviously, if you know, you know. You know, it stars the great James Stewart as George Bailey, this guy who is constantly trying to leave his hometown, constantly trying to fulfill his lifelong dream, basically, of traveling the world and seeing the world and going different places, experiencing different things. But he's chained down to his hometown and he hates it. But he faces it with this optimism. He faces it with this kind of, you know, well, I'm going to make the best with what I've got. And he ends up kind of taking over his father's business, kind of a loan company, and kind of all the local people, they take out loans with his bank company and everything like that. And instead of being ruthless with those loans and the people have to pay him money back, he is lenient, and he does that to try and help people instead of kind of condemning them to, you know, a fate. He tries to kind of help them into a better life. And so you see this guy who's struggling with his own personal demons. He's struggling with his own you know, yearning for more in his life, and yet he still just, you know, really tries to help everyone that he can. Right back from when he was a kid, we see him from a young age up till when he's an adult, and then he falls in love, he has a family, but ultimately he realizes that he's never going to win. This fight that he has with life just isn't working out, and so he decides he's going to take his own life, and the insurance is going to set his family up, and they'll live a better life without him. But he gets stopped by this old man who calls himself an angel and shows him a world in which he had never existed. And so it's one of those great kind of morality plays, you know, on the big screen, where you see something that's kind of, you know, it's a fantasy. But right from the get-go, this film is a fantasy. You see these angels in space kind of talking with each other and talking about this man and why, you know, he's going to try and take his life tonight. We've got to go back and see his whole life and understand why he got to this point, and then that's how we see the movie. I love the whole framing device, and I think the performances in the film are absolutely incredible. It is my nan's favorite film, and it's interesting because most of my family, my mum, my dad, you know, my other grandparents, they don't have a favorite film. I always ask them, what's your favorite film? I don't know. But my nan, she's like, It's a Wonderful Life, watches it every year. And I got to see it with her for the very first time a few years ago in a small cinema on a pier down in my hometown, which was so much fun, and a really emotional experience too. You know, it was a small, you know, screening room, but everyone was into it. Everyone was laughing at all the funny bits and kind of getting choked up at all the emotional bits. Just an amazing cinema experience. But the film itself is an amazing cinema experience, and it was great to share it with Connie a couple of years ago, I think, and we did a review of that, so you can hear more about that if you want. But for me, I think it is just one of those films that just makes you feel so happy and warm inside by the end, and it's just such an endearing and emotional film. For me, absolutely is one of the best films I've ever seen.
Mary, I know what I'm going to do tomorrow and the next day and next year and a year after that. I'm shaking the dust of this crummy little town off my feet, and I'm going to see the world.
Number 12 from 1953. This is going to be one of the most controversial choices in my list, if not maybe the most. Limelight, directed by Charlie Chaplin and starring Charlie Chaplin. It's one of Chaplin's films that really doesn't get much credit, much discussion, much of anything really. I feel like when it comes to Chaplin, And you'll note this is the only Chaplin film I've got in the list. I didn't put any of his silent films in, as great as they are, as much as I love The Kid, as much as I love The Gold Rush, The Circus, you know, City Lights, Modern Times, The Great Dictator. He was an incredible performer and director. But I think that he really was building his whole life towards this film, not consciously. Limelight, I think, is just a masterpiece of just humanity. Chaplin plays this faded kind of vaudeville star. He worked on the stage and he did comedy and things like that. And now he's an older man in the 1950s, and he's a has-been basically. This Calvero was his name, and he's trying to go back to doing what he did before, but there's no money in it anymore. People don't remember him, and things are moving past him. Things are kind of passing him by. And he's basically, looking at the twilight of his years. He's a bit of an alcoholic. He doesn't really take his life too seriously anymore. And then he comes across a young woman who lives in the same building as him, who is trying to kill herself. She closes the door and puts the gas on. And he goes in and he saves her in kind of a drunken stupor, and he takes her up to his apartment and nurses her back to health, and realizes that she's this ballerina who can't use her legs anymore. She can't do the thing that she's great at. And she's depressed about it, and he picks her up and says, well, life is this amazing thing. It's a brilliant scene where he's just talking about how precious life is, and how you've got to just fight it and stand up, And it's such an inspiring moment that isn't, it isn't at the level of the speech he gives in The Great Dictator, but it's almost more powerful to me. And then they form this friendship that to me is just one of the best things I've seen in any film. I'm so attached to that relationship between the two of them. I forget the character's name now, even though I've only seen the film twice, and it's one of my favourite films, but the woman's name, the actress, is Claire Bloom, and she's just wonderful in the film, and you so buy this relationship between the two that, does form into a bit of a romantic thing, but it doesn't go the way you'd expect, and I love that. And I think it's one of the best films about love and relationships, but also art, and how art can define our lives and also be a part of it, and how that kind of works with everything, basically. I loved how his kind of, because we see it kind of, they're weird kind of flashback dreams of him kind of performing on the stage, and there's a great one where he does this whole kind of almost like silent film skit, and then he looks out to the crowd and there's no one there anymore. And it's like Chaplin looking at this kind of world in which the silent films are no more, and he at that time he was being ostracized by the world, because there's a whole backstory that I won't get into, but he got kind of deported from the States, and everything went wrong for Chaplin, and this film didn't get released for decades because of that. So it has kind of a poignancy to his own story, but just as this character, this Calvero, trying to relive his old glory maybe one last time, but also to see not himself, but to see the kind of joy in expressing yourself through your art in this young woman when she kind of gets better again and is able to dance again. And I just love it. I think it's a phenomenal film, and it's not just a film that I love and is a favorite. I think it is a fantastic film that really deserves a lot more credit.
Think of the power that's in the universe, moving the earth, growing the trees, and that's the same power within you, if you'll only have courage and the will to use it.
At number 13, we have Tokyo Story from 1953, directed by Yasujiro Ozu. This is the first Japanese film in the list, and before I even get to this film, I want to give credit to a film from the 30s called Make Way for Tomorrow, which is another phenomenal film that was kind of in kind of the contention for me for entering this list, but didn't quite make it. I think that Tokyo Story is the better film, and it's kind of a remake of Make Way for Tomorrow, even though the films are quite different in the way they play out, not just because of the Japanese culture, but the way that the story unfolds and what it's really about. In Tokyo Story, we follow this elderly couple who go to the city to see their children. They live in the country, and it's quite a long train ride, and they go and see their kids and find that their kids are kind of busy doing their own thing. They've got their own kids, and they don't have the time or even really the interest to hang out with their parents. And so these two people, they end up spending more time with their daughter-in-law, who her husband passed away in the war, I believe, and so their son, who has passed away, he has this widow that's been left behind, and so they spend more time with her. and the actress who plays her, I forget her name, is just so wonderful in the film. And that relationship between the two parents and their daughter-in-law is such a sweet and special thing. And in Make Way for Tomorrow, it's about an elderly couple who they basically lose their house and they have to go and live with their kids, but their kids are like, well, we can't take you both, we haven't got room, so they end up kind of being split up, and it's about the couple trying to live away from each other in different cities. But in Tokyo Story, it's about how the kids don't appreciate their parents anymore, and kind of the heartbreak of that, but also this kind of I don't say a love story, but you just, there's such a feeling of niceness, which is a horrible kind of term to use, but this couple, seeing their love for each other, which is so subtle and poignant, that there's a comfortability with these two characters. I almost felt like it was a real life couple, like that these actors were actually together for real, because it just felt, I just bought into it so much when I first saw it, and every time I see it. I really believe in this couple, and it's not overdone. It's very simple. It's very subtle, and the way Ozu shoots the thing, and you can go into all that kind of stuff about Ozu's movies and how he shoots kind of down at ground level and things like that, very static, but it just lets things unfold. It feels kind of not even documentary-like, but there's just such a realism, a raw realism to the way he makes films, and I just think Tokyo Story is a masterpiece of, that whole idea of where we come from and our parents, and that kind of idea of taking care of them once they become old enough for that to be necessary, and not to the point where you have to have constant care of them, but they brought you into the world, they cared for you, they fostered you, they brought you up, and then it gets to the point where they're at the end of their life, and you should kind of you should appreciate them more. This is I won't say a life-changing movie, but in fact, no, it's a life-changing movie. I'll tell you what it is, because when I saw this, and I think anyone who watches this will think, oh my God, I really should, appreciate my parents and my grandparents while they're still around, and seeing their kids kind of being so flippant about their parents is so heartbreaking. But after watching this for the first time, I started doing this project where I sat down and started interviewing my family and just getting to know them more. You realize that you know your family and you've known them your whole lives, but how much do you really know them? Do you know much about their childhood, their youth, especially your grandparents? And so I did these kind of 2-hour interviews with all my grandparents and learned all these things I never knew about them. And that's because of this film, in a roundabout way. There was another bit of inspiration, but that was part of it. Like, look, I need to do this now. I need to appreciate them now. That was the thing, and it works on its own as this kind of this drama, and one that takes its time, but you really settle in with the characters. Again, comfortable is a word that keeps coming back to me with this film, but I do think it really says something about that relationship that that parents have with their children have with their parents at that kind of point where the parents are becoming old enough for it to be, it's towards the end. What do you do? How much time do you make for them? And I think that that's something that's really important. And that's something that I think about with a lot of these films in this list is, how important is the theme of the film and what it tells you about yourself and what you can kind of take and use in your real life in a positive way. So, there we go. Number 14 from 1954, another Japanese film, directed by Akira Kurosawa, the great Japanese master, Seren Samurai. Spoilers, if I was to do this list in order of which film I thought was the best, this is it. This is the granddaddy. This is the best film I've ever seen. It's held that title for the past 7 years, and I'd be astonished if another film knocked it off, and kind of a little sad if another film did knock it off. I'm kind of excited to explore, the rest of the world of cinema to see if that's possible inside my own head. But this is the best film I've ever seen, and I've talked about it before. I'm going to talk about it again, and I don't want to get into it too deep here. But I just have to say that this is such an impressive film. This 3.5-hour long epic about a group of villagers who get raided by bandits every 6 months or so. They come in, take half their food. If you've seen the Pixar film A Bug's Life, it's that, basically. And they decide, okay, enough is enough, and it's time for a change, to quote the late, great Owen Hart. And they go out and they hire some samurai, 7 samurai to be precise, to help them defend themselves. And it sounds like a very basic setup, but I love the complexity of the story as it unfolds towards the third act of the film, where, you know, everything isn't black and white, even though the film is black and white. There's kind of more shades to the morality of the thing. You know, where you learn that, okay, are these villagers really what they seem? You know, what's good, what's bad? Are these samurai good people because they're samurai, or do they have bad sides as well? You explore so much about these characters, and I think that they all have, all of the seven samurai, they have their own characteristics, and a handful of them are really explored in depth. You've got some incredible actors here, and I think if this wasn't directed by Kurosawa, if this didn't star, you know, Takashi Shimura or Toshiro Mifune, you know, all these recognizable actors, to me it would be so easy to kind of buy into the idea that this was like a lost film that was made 400 years ago and was done for real and was a documentary. Because the locations they used, the costume design, this feels like it really is in the era that it's set in, hundreds of years ago in like feudal era Japan. That's one of the kind of key things to this film, is the authenticity that it brings. Now, no film is perfect. There's a few things in here that I go, ah, well, you can see that's kind of fake. But for the most part, it's so impressive from just the staging of it. But then you've got the way it's shot. Then you've got the music. Then you've got these powerful performances, whether it's a performance that's quiet and kind of meaningful from Takashi Shimura, or whether it's one that's loud and boisterous and powerful and animalistic from Toshiro Mifune, and then all the other characters. You know, there's so many expressive performances in the film. I just think that it's the best film I've ever seen. So it's as simple as that. I'll talk about it more at another point, I'm sure, but this had to be on the list, surely. Number 15, another film from a great master of cinema, Rear Window by Alfred Hitchcock. And, you know, Hitchcock, there's so many to choose from. There's so many great films, so many great moments, you know, so many great performances, so many iconic shots, you know. The way that Hitchcock constructs his films visually and thematically, and the way he ratchets up tension and the way he explores characters is almost unparalleled. You know, he was one of the absolute best, but Rear Window is my favorite, but also I think his best. You can look at Psycho, you know, you can look at some of the other ones that kind of, you know, Rope even, I think, might be one that's maybe on the outskirts a little bit, but I think is one of his better films as well. But Rear Window, I think, is the best, and one of the best films I've seen, because there's such a simplicity to it. It's a film set in an apartment, and we have a character played by James Stewart who is kind of laid off. He's a photographer, and his leg has been kind of hurt, so he can't go anywhere. He wants to get out there. This isn't in his nature to be kind of caged up, and he's restless, and he's kind of moody, and he's looking out of his window and observing the people living in the block opposite and then around the whole area. Now, the set itself is so incredible and so impressive and believable, but it's this idea that they're tapping into this kind of this element of voyeurism that I think is inherent in pretty much every person. You know, to varying degrees, of course. I'm not saying everyone's a peeping Tom. And it doesn't even have to be sexual. It's just that idea of, you know, when you see someone who you don't know is a stranger, they're doing something large, you just give it a look. You know, you just want to see, and it's something I always think about, actually. It's that idea of seeing someone out and about in your day-to-day life and thinking, I wonder what their life is like. I wonder what they get up to. You know, I wonder what their experience is in all of this. You know, maybe that's just me, I don't know, but I often think that, like, there's a whole life there 20 feet away from me, and I wonder what it is. I'm just intrigued. I naturally am intrigued by other people, other experiences. And that's what I love about Rear Window is him kind of just looking at the people across the street and kind of, you know, coming up with, like, oh, that's the woman down there, and, you know, kind of almost creating stories in his head about what they really do and what they're really getting up to and how they feel. And he has his girlfriend played by Grace Kelly who comes in and sees him, and just the way it develops, the way he starts to think that there's kind of a conspiracy going on, that there might be a murder plot happening across the street, and again how it's all set in that apartment for the most part, and the tension that it builds up is absolutely sublime. I think it is so impressive, and James Stewart, so good, and he really makes the whole thing work. I mean, it was all working anyway, but he's just, to me, he's the added extra kind of punch that makes the film as fantastic as it is, and it never really leaves one room, which I think is really impressive. But it's just one of those ones that every time I see it, I'm like, wow, this is even better than it was the first time I saw it. Just a great film.
I know. I'll use this to peer into Springfield's seamy underbelly.
Grace, come here. There's a sinister-looking kid I want you to see.
Oh.
Number 16, and this is turning into quite an international kind of flavoured part of this series, and I guess that kind of speaks to this period in general in the 50s. I think this is where international cinema was really exploding as this powerful force in the world of movies. But from 1955, Path of Panchali, which is an Indian film by another great master of cinema, Satyajit Ray. I've only seen about 4 or 5 of his films, and they're all amazing, pretty much. But this one, which is the first film in the Apu trilogy, though I think that this film isn't really as much about the young boy Apu as it is his mother, who was the actress who plays the mother in this film. It's one of my favourite performances and one of the most impressive ones I've seen. You know, this mother struggling with her family, and you just get this snapshot into this way of living that to us, you know, in the Western world, and obviously going back, you know, 50, 60 years, whatever, is so far removed from reality, really. Kind of just living in this small little area, pretty much out in the wilderness. You know, there's a little bit of a community there, but it's again just so far removed. Just seeing that slice of life enough was so interesting to me. But the emotions of this mother trying to do right by her family, trying to raise her son, trying to raise her daughter, to get her husband to pull his act together and kind of just, you know, provide for his family, because that's what she's been tasked with doing. And it's and there's a quietness to the emotions in the film that is really just utterly captivating to me. But again, Apu is a kind of a central part of the film too, and I just think that the close-ups of this young boy in this film is perhaps maybe the greatest example of a childlike sense of wonder and naivety and innocence, and kind of a wonder of the world ahead of him. You know, there's just such a beauty and a magic to this young kid seeing a train for the first time. You know, these wonderful sequences that kind of just celebrate the kind of the minutiae of life. And it's just an unforgettable film. There are just frames of it that are just completely burnt into my brain. I saw it like less than a year ago, and it's still almost as fresh in my mind now as it was the day I saw it, and I can't wait to go back to it. And it's one of those films I'm going to want to leave a space, because every time I want to go back to it, I want to be kind of reminded again how great it is. And you might say, well, it's very simple. You know, there's not much going on with the cinematography. It's, you know, there's not much music. It's just very simple and kind of just, you know, yeah, it's nice for what it is. But I don't know. For me, sometimes I think greatness can be achieved through simplicity. And that might be a theme that will be revisited later on in this list. I think there is really something to be said about capturing life and essence of what the human experience is. You know, show me that, and I'm incredibly impressed. You know, there's always an artifice. Not always, but there's almost always an artifice to the way that films are constructed. You see these characters and these actors playing them, and you kind of know that they're actors and stuff. And I'm not saying that you forget that they're actors in this film, but there's just this rawness to it that I buy into more than pretty much any film I've seen before. And that very well could be because they're actors I've never seen before, and because it's, you know, it's in an exotic country as far as I'm concerned, and it's a completely different lifestyle and culture. And that was something I enjoyed seeing too. It's just, again, just a different culture, a different way of doing things and whatnot. But not too far removed from us either. You know, that idea that we're all the same, you know, deep down. And at the end of the day, they're just trying to make it as a family. And you really pull for them, and it really got me by the end of the film. There's a scene, the scene with the bracelet and Apu. If you've seen the film, it really gets me, you know. And that's another thing. See, it can be about all those things where it's simple and it's, you know, it kind of celebrates life and things, it captures an essence, but it also has that emotional punch, which drives it from being a really good film to being an all-time great one, I think. So for me, it just had to be on the list. Number 17, and again another Japanese film, or films, and I haven't really specified this yet on whether I will include a series of films or a trilogy of films. All I'll say is this is the only time I'm including more than one movie in one spot. That's because this film is been kind of shown in many different ways. It has been shown as a 6-part series. It's been shown as a 3-part trilogy. It's also considered as one, like, 9+ hour long film. It's an epic, released between 1959 and 1961, directed by Masaki Kobayashi, and starring one of the great actors of all time, I think Tatsuya Nakadai, who worked with Kurosawa and many other great Japanese directors, including Kobayashi. But this film, for me, may be the best war film ever made, that I've seen, of course. I mean, there are other big ones I haven't seen, like Apocalypse Now, or Saving Private Ryan. Maybe those films will kind of blow this out of the water. But this is a film that just absolutely gets into all these different facets of war, how horrible it was, but just these elements you never would really think about before. And also having the time to tell this story over, 9 hours, and seeing this very different evolution of a character that Tatsuya Nakadai plays, this guy who is very much a pacifist, and works in kind of managing the labor in this prisoner of war camp. And that's the first film, basically, this 3-hour+ movie about him trying to kind of deal with all the politics of everything going on, and making this labor and kind of the prisoners they have to make their conditions good. He really is trying to be this positive influence, but he keeps pushing, and he keeps getting pushed back by the other people who work there, but also by the prisoners themselves. And in the second film, he ends up being enlisted, and he has to join the army and do something that he never wanted to do because he's a pacifist. But he basically does what he always does, which is to try and do the very best he can, and he becomes this great leader, this great soldier. And there's a sequence in the second film where he's on the battlefield, and it's so unglamorized to me. It's so frightening. Just these tanks rolling over the dirt and just these explosions going off. There's no big dramatic music. There's no kind of, again, dramatic close-ups. It's just the shells and the boom, and just this struggle to not get blown up, which, again, there's a film like Paths of Glory, the Kubrick movie with Kirk Douglas. That's one of the best war films as well. The trenches sequence in that film is so powerful, almost brought me to tears. And it's such an elaborate production, and it just is so haunting. And maybe that is really what it was like in kind of in the trenches in the world wars, but that sequence in The Human Condition just felt so believable to me that it was even scarier than something that felt bigger, if that makes sense. And then the third film, he becomes a prisoner of war himself, and then he's on the run, and kind of leading these people through the wilderness, and you just see this. It's such an amazing arc for this character, and such an incredible journey, an incredibly harrowing journey. It isn't a nice film. It's a very sad one. It's a heartbreaking film, but it's a necessary one, I think. This really shows you the rigors of what it could have been like to go through all these different elements of what the world wars were, which are just a horrific thing that happened, and it's something that we've always been destined to do, unfortunately, is to fight each other, and it gets to points where it just explodes into these huge, massive scale things that are just so pointless and fruitless and tragic. And this film shows us how far humanity came in kind of sinking down to this horrible thing called war, and Tatsuya Nakadai gives a knockout performance in a way that isn't trying to be one, which I think is always the best. It's a stunning piece of work, and I think deserves to be seen more. Number 18, again continuing the international flavor, but bringing things up a bit, a little less emotional and a bit more fun, finally. I think about that now, that 50 section, it's all very kind of emotional, kind of dreary stuff, but this is a hell of a ride. From Sergio Leone, we have The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly from 1966. Fistful of Dollars is really fun, and for a few dollars more is fantastic, but this is the one. I love this film so much. It's an epic, and it has 3 characters that are all so memorable. I think there are great films out there, like really great 10 out of 10 films out there that have a standout character that's as good as any of the 3 in this movie, and this movie has 3 of them at the same time. We have Clint Eastwood, we have Lee Van Cleef, and we have Eli Wallach as Blondie, as Angel Eyes, and as Tuco, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it's this great epic story about kind of greed and this lust for money and this gold that has been hidden somewhere, and how we have these three very different characters all on the same path to find this gold, to claim this treasure, and the ways they're all trying to screw each other out of it. And I mean, it's a story that's kind of pulpy, you know, and kind of trashy in a way if you think about it, just as kind of standard adventure. But the film has this incredible kind of sense of scale. It has this incredible cinematography that really lends itself well to the kind of story that it's telling. You know, it's a western, so you get these great plains, these great landscapes, but framing those characters in those landscapes and making those characters feel larger than life in these larger than life landscapes. And then you have the score, the incredible score by Ennio Morricone, which is just one of the best scores ever, I think. And when you get to that last kind of 15 minutes of the movie, that is just some of the best stuff you'll ever see in a film. Right from when the ecstasy of gold starts and Tuco starts running through that graveyard, to when they have the stare down and kind of the kind of three-man showdown. It's just amazing. I've watched that ending 100 times. I think it's just one of the best scenes ever committed to film. But it's also a case where the build-up to it has been just as fun, just as exciting, just as cinematic. You know, there's such a flair for the dramatic with this film. And then there's a somberness to some of it as well. The scene where Angel Eyes kind of walks through that kind of that place that's kind of been ravaged by the war and everything. But really, it's about these three characters and them getting to that face-off at the end of the film, which is just pure cinematic gold.
You see, in this world, there's two kinds of people, my friend. Those with loaded guns and those who dig.
Number 19, finally an American film. We have The Graduate from 1967. Only seen this once, saw it last year. I just said as soon as it had finished, that's one of the best films I've seen, just as far as every element at play. The way the thing was directed, you know, the way that everything came together. The whole package, you know, the way it was shot, the way it was edited, the way that those montage sequences where it's just these kind of things happening with the characters and time is passing, but we're having this music laid under from Simon and Garfunkel. And I love when films tell some parts of their stories with just visuals and music. You know, just a song, you know, with lyrics, you know, sometimes not, but songs that have lyrics to them and kind of using kind of visuals in the story of the film that play along, not necessarily with the lyrics, but just with the feeling of the song, and kind of just telling kind of what you need to know in a shorter way than playing it out with individual scenes, but in a way that just feels exciting and rhythmic. There's a way to do it that is really satisfying to the eye and the brain, I guess, the way that you're kind of digesting part of this story and kind of condensing it down to this kind of almost music video form, but it's classier than that, you know, and it serves the story. I love those parts in this film, so I think music is used so well in The Graduate. But the acting is great too. Anne Bancroft, you have Dustin Hoffman playing this young guy who gets seduced by the older woman, Mrs. Robinson, which is kind of a scene that gets parodied a lot. And so it was one of those things I always kind of wrote off as just, that film that everyone talks about. Mrs. Robinson, you're trying to seduce me. But there's something really, really intriguing about it, about this guy who's trying to find himself. He really is just trying to find his place. The very opening of the film, you see him at this party his parents are throwing, they're kind of showing off their son, and the camera's in tight on him. It's really close and claustrophobic. You see how he's really uncomfortable in this social situation he's been thrust into. That's the cinematography actually making you feel what the character's feeling. That's when real genius is at play in constructing a film visually, I think. But Dustin Hoffman is great. And kind of, you know, this relationship with this older woman, and kind of the idea of being with someone older, and then the idea of this woman sleeping with this younger guy, and kind of her trying to find her place in life by maybe turning the clock back a little bit. And then he falls in love with her daughter, which only complicates things. And I just love everything about it. Every scene feels so vital to the one that came before it. And by the time you get to the end, you have this wonderful finale, which is just, I absolutely love, and I'm a big fan of movie endings. If you can really end a film well, then you've done your job. You know, sometimes it can erase kind of bad memories of scenes that weren't so great. But this is a film that's great all the way through, and then has this fantastic ending that is open-ended, and I love how it kind of is framed as this big joyous thing, and then you just see in the actor's eyes, because they play it so brilliantly, that where do you go from here? Probably isn't going to work, is it? So brilliant. Love this film, and it just instantly became an all-timer for me.
Mrs. Robinson, you're trying to seduce me. Aren't you?
And number 20, we have 2001, A Space Odyssey from 1968. This is a film that had to be on the list, right? And it's definitely, I think this is one of the films I enjoy the least that's in this entire list, because again, I'm looking at what I think is the best. You can kind of look at this and say that it's kind of all style, no substance, but the more I watch it every time, I get new things out of it. I mean, it's a film you can really enjoy on a purely technical aspect. The special effects, I mean, it's 50 years now since the film came out. There's something really, really special about the way this film looks and the way that it was shot. The special effects, so ahead of their time. But also how they serve this grand overarching story that is so spiritual and really deep. And it's a film you can really look at, and you can just bring all your own experiences into it, all your own thoughts, and on purpose, on faith, on humanity. You know, it's a grand film with grand ideas that are presented fairly simply. Simply, is that a word? Simply? Yeah, simply. What am I talking about? I was trying to like kind of extend the word to simply. I'll leave that one in for free. So I love that about it, and there's just some mesmerizing sequences in it, and while it's told in kind of an episodic fashion, I like the through line of all of it. By the time we get to that kind of the Star Child sequence at the end, which is it's something else. It's a trip. You know, they're just releasing this film again in cinemas in 70mm, and I'm dying to go and see it, but I probably don't have the time to see it at all. But it's one of those films that is absolutely made for the big screen. This is what spectacle movie making is all about. And it's a film that has endured for all the right reasons, I think. And the score, incredible. You know, that marries so well with the visual. There's just something hypnotic about the film. It gets very slow at times, and that's very intentional. And again, it isn't a film that I absolutely love and kind of would watch over and over again. But it's a film that I see so much craft in. And I see so much meaning in as well. Every time I see it, that there's just more depth to it. So it's one of the films I think has to be on a list of anyone's greatest films, as far as, you know, the best films you've seen. Or at least I think most people should probably think, you know, because I think if you see this and you don't appreciate the craft in it somewhere, then I don't know what to say to you. But I understand people who don't enjoy it. But I just think that it has so much going for it in the sense that, you know, it's just a one-of-a-kind film, you know, that I don't think many people have ever really come close to in this style of a science fiction movie. And I think it is one of the all-time great science fiction movies as well, obviously, if it's in this list, and it's a science fiction movie. But, you know, yeah, I think that it's an incredible piece of work, and absolutely deserve to be on my list, at least. So there we go, that was part 2. I hope you enjoyed it. Went a lot longer than I thought it would, and it's interesting now, just even filming it and thinking about it, that there isn't a real international flavour to that section in the 50s there, which is interesting to me when I think about it. Anyway, hope you enjoyed. Leave your thoughts down below on any of the films I talked about, and I'll see you in part 3.